Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the latest episode. Today's guest is Mark Evans. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here and excited to talk about a range of marketing topics today.
Well, with that in mind, why don't we jump into it? So for those who aren't familiar, you have a book called Marketing Spark and a podcast called Marketing Spark. I'm curious to know, I guess the impetus for both. What sparked the book, and then what sparked the podcast? And if you want to highlight a little bit about what the book is about as well, and the podcast.
So as background, I was a journalist. I worked for two of Canada's national newspapers as well as Bloomberg News. So I'm a writer by training, and a book was an itch that I had to scratch. If I had to think of it from a strategic point of view, was if I write a book, I'll have better credibility. I'll be able to go to conferences and be asked to speak. That was sort of the strategic side of it. The emotional side was writing a book would be super cool. So that's why I did it. It's the same thing that when I was in my 20s, I ran a marathon. One marathon, and that was it. I never wanted to run another one again. And I took the same approach to a book. And the book it's not your traditional marketing book. It doesn't have a thesis or a hypothesis that I spend 200 pages thinking and writing about.
Right.
It's more of a guide to doing marketing. So I would suggest it's not really a book for marketers, but more for entrepreneurs who want a user-friendly way to think about how to do marketing, what's important about marketing, things like positioning and storytelling, and then best practices for the different channels they want to leverage. So it's the kind of book that sits on your desk, hopefully, rather than collect dust in a bookshelf.
To be more of a resource.
Exactly. It is a resource as opposed to something that you would think about and that's provocative. It's more of a how-to guide than something like, something that Simon Sinek would write, Always
Right.
Ask Why, which is more of a big picture kind of book.
Well, so you ran a marathon, never to do it again. You've written a book. Is there another book in you, or never do it again?
My honest answer would be maybe. I feel like there's another book, a different kind of book. I look at what April Dunford did with Obviously Awesome, which is a very popular and very powerful book, but very simplistic in its approach, very accessible, very user-friendly. It's the kind of book that entrepreneurs read and immediately deploy many of the things that she suggests. And I think there's a book in me that will take the same kind of approach. The best ideas, you borrow the best ideas as opposed to create them yourself. So I think if I wrote a book, it would be more along those lines. But it's definitely something that's in the background, and I just have to find the right idea.
Well, similar to you, I wrote a book. I don't know if I had an itch when I was young, nor if I knew I had the capability within me, but for a variety of reasons and inspiration, I wrote a book. Initially, when I finished it, I was like, nope, never doing that again. And similar to you, I'm starting to think about another idea as to when it'll manifest itself. That remains to be seen, but I'm not rushing into it, as they say. So, the book has led to a podcast. Are you following similar themes with the podcast, or how has it evolved as you've moved into the new medium?
The podcast was one of these things that I had been thinking about for a while, but to be honest with you, I was intimidated by the idea of producing a podcast and the technology involved to make it happen. And, as the barriers to entry became lower and lower, software became cheap, if not increasingly free, then a podcast just seemed doable, and it seemed something that I would enjoy doing. And I think that's the thing about the podcast. There's lots of ways that you can measure ROI. Downloads, streams, and subscribers are obviously the biggest ones, the biggest KPIs. But number two would be, the kind of conversations that you have, the people that you can approach to be on your podcast. And the amazing thing is that I would say that 99% of the people who I have invited over the last 3 years have said yes. And some of them have been high profile entrepreneurs and marketers, and some of them have just been people that I like and I made friends with on LinkedIn, and I thought they'd be a good conversation. And obviously the third part is you get this amazing content that you can use to power all kinds of different content marketing. So I would say if you had to analyze the ROI, it has very little to do with streams and downloads and subscribers, and everything to do with all the other things that you can get from a podcast. So it's been a labor of love. And as an ex-reporter, the ability to ask questions and probe and analyze and discuss has been really a lot of fun.
But are there certain topics or themes that you're exploring through it, in terms of the types of guests that you're getting or the conversations you're having?
So at a high level, the podcast is focused on talking to B2B entrepreneurs, B2B SaaS entrepreneurs and marketers, and trying to understand their marketing challenges, marketing successes, marketing failures, and provide people with real insight into inside the marketing game. There's lots of content about thought leadership and here's what I think, but I don't think there's enough content about here's what we do and here's how you actually make marketing work. So for example, I recently did a podcast on how people could get started with account-based marketing. It was ABM 101, interviewing somebody who spends a lot of their time doing this kind of work for B2B SaaS companies. And so what I was hoping to do and what I look to do with the podcast is open people's eyes to what's possible. What you can do, what are best practices, what does success look like, and some of the things to avoid. So it's a very, again, it probably aligns with the way that I look at marketing. It's a very practical guide to marketing and how to do it well.
From what you had originally conceived of for the show versus where you are now, somewhat 3 years later, have you been surprised by where you've gone with the subject matter, or where you've been inspired in terms of the kind of guests that you've pursued?
I think the thing that has surprised me most is the fact that the podcast seems to have a audience, despite the fact that I consider it my little tiny little project that I work with on the side. It really, like the companies that approach me, the podcast agencies that want to have guests appear on my podcast, it obviously has credibility, and people see it as a go-to resource. I think that's the way they see it. And I think that comes with doing a podcast for 3 years. Not necessarily week after week, because sometimes I go on vacation and I don't do it, but it's consistency. And I think that's one of the things that defines podcast success these days, is just being consistent and looking at it as a long-term project. Because a lot of podcasts, people get very excited. Then they get into the mechanics of finding guests, interviewing guests, producing the podcast, and then having to promote it, and they lose their enthusiasm. And as much as I'm an advocate for podcasts and that every B2B SaaS company should have a podcast, it's not easy to do. It involves a lot of work, and you know how it goes.
Yep.
And so I think, from the outside looking in, when people look at a podcast that's been around for 3 years, they go, well, this guy's serious about it, and we should take him seriously, and he's hopefully worthy of having our people appear on his podcast. So I think the most surprising thing is the fact that it's gained traction. And to be honest with you, I haven't really tried that hard. I just like what I do, and I publish a podcast on a regular basis, and it seems to work.
Well, I mean, similar to you, I just enjoy the conversations, but the recording is the easy part. It's the keeping a running list of potential guests. It's the post-production. It's the promotion. And when we talk to clients about podcasting or and I just have to say to them, Mark Maron, Joe Rogan, these are 10 years in. They're number one. Smartless, 3 or 4 years. Armchair Expert, 5 years. And, 2 episodes a week. And so, like to your point, it's that kind of commitment. And if you're not, I warn them, don't start a podcast unless you're ready to do it for at least a year. And I've even had to recalibrate mine because ran into post-production issues related to just available bandwidth, and that's been rectified, and now we're on to the next cycle of episodes. But this isn't about me, but you highlighted some of the things that people don't thoroughly consider when they're looking at a podcast venture of some kind.
Well, I think that's the important thing to figure out, whether it's a 30-minute podcast or 45 minutes. You've got to extract value from it, because otherwise it just sits on an RSS feed somewhere, and it feels good to publish a podcast, but nothing really happens. So you've got to figure out, how do we promote and distribute the podcast? That's number one. So the video clips, the audio clips, the social media promotion, the links, the LinkedIn post that you would write to highlight the podcast. That's all that grunt work that goes involved. And then the other side is, how do we extract insights from the podcast to write better, high value blog posts, to write ebooks, or to do extended video clips that deliver value? Because there's so much content that you can pull out of a podcast. And the thing, in a world full of generic content, chat GPT generic content, podcasts are evergreen, authentic material. That it's gold, it's content gold, and to not take advantage of that is to leave a lot of money on the table.
Well, this episode will live on. It'll be a master episode of video, a master episode of audio. There'll be some short audio clips, some short video clips, some graphics, likely, to your point, a blog post. And that can stay in rotation. And the same methodology can be applied to any podcast. And to your point, when you think about the library that you can accumulate, if you apply that methodology to every single episode, it doesn't mean you have to have 2 episodes a week. I mean, you can get a lot out of 1 episode a month if that's all you can manage. But it's just applying, to your point, the framework or the repeatable methodology.
And the other thing I think that we should emphasize, or I should emphasize, is the relationships that you build with the podcast. The idea that you have a very intimate one-on-one discussion with different types of people, and that changes the dynamic in terms of your relationship. So you can go back and forth with somebody on LinkedIn and post, great comments, very engaging, digital conversations. But when you make the leap from digital to voice, to audio, and you're talking to someone and you see them in front of you and you're having a conversation, then that establishes a very strong personal connection. And whether that sparks opportunities from that person or people within their network, it's a totally different dynamic. So for a lot of B2B, B2B SaaS companies, if you want to build stronger relationships with your customers, get them on your podcast. If you want to reach out to influencers and bring them into your world, get them on your podcast. If you identify prospects that you think could deliver great insight, get them on your podcast. It's the Trojan horse of podcasting, is the fact that people love talking. If you invite them to a podcast, most likely they'll come on.
Most likely they'll show up.
Yep.
And I had a conversation with someone I've never met in person. I met them through LinkedIn. I listened to their podcast, and we had an episode. I recorded an episode with them yesterday, and you've probably experienced this as well. When a conversation is so good that you veer away from the questions you had planned, like that, like the conversation becomes increasingly natural. Questions make themselves evident, and before you know it, the hour is gone. And as well, I was learning a lot about sales enablement and deriving insights from CRM and a whole bunch of things that I'm not that close to, even though I've had a sales background. I'm not in sales the way that they are. And to your point, I'm sort of, my curiosity is representing my audience with the guest, and hoping to extract insights from the guest.
And that's kind of the funny part or the interesting part is I look at podcasts, many podcast interviews as free consulting sessions where somebody super smart about a particular topic is giving me the inside dirt, all their expertise and all their experience. And sometimes I forget that I'm interviewing somebody and I feel like I'm the student or the client, and they're just giving me this great advice, and I feel like I should write notes furiously because that I do it by training, but it really is a great way to learn, and I got a lot of value, a lot of personal growth and professional growth from talking to people and who are a lot smarter about different things than me. So that's been like yet another benefit of podcasting.
Was the tipping point for the show when people started reaching out to you, like agencies or like groups that represent, or even just a website that acts as an intermediary for finding guests? Was that a tipping point for the momentum of the show, where people were seeking you out to be a guest?
I'm self-motivated in many ways. So initially the podcast was driven by enthusiasm and the fact that I realized that a podcast was possible and that the technical barriers had pretty much disappeared. And I just did it for fun. I did it as a side hustle that helped me learn and build relationships with all kinds of interesting people. And I think, as I said, as the podcast, word of mouth, I think, was a big thing for me. People had appeared on the podcast and really enjoyed the experience. I think agencies look for podcasts that are established and have a track record and that are consistent, and that separates you from the pack. Because I don't know what the stats are, but I suspect that a lot of podcasts don't last very long, a few months maybe tops.
Yeah,
And then
there's a lot of ghost towns.
there's a lot of ghost towns, and then when you get on the radar of the agencies, then that sort of changes the dynamics. Now, I will be completely honest in saying that 90% of the pitches that I get from podcast agencies are worthless, are a lack of research, a shotgun approach to outreach. There's no personalization. And it's incredible. Sometimes they get the personalization completely wrong. I've been called wrong names. They've clearly never listened to one of my podcast episodes. It's basically, well, let's throw stuff out the wall and see what sticks. So their track record with success is not terribly good. And I rely a lot on the people that I meet on LinkedIn for guests, and then there's companies that reach out to me directly, and I'm always happy to hear from them.
Well, have you seen signs of, I'll call it, out in the wild, of the impact of the show? Are there people commenting that they're outside your network, like sort of signs of that you found an audience that you didn't know about or consider?
Well, anecdotally, the most important, KPIs. I love your show. I heard your show. I heard your interview with Rand Fishkin. It was awesome. It's all the sort of the side conversations or the comments that people make when they talk to you. And I can't say that there's a direct correlation between my podcast and lead generation. Ultimately, as a marketer, you're looking for leads and sales, if we had to be completely transparent here. And I can't say that actually happens, but these days in marketing, it's hard to know what works because you're doing all kinds of different things, and something's going to work somehow. But I just feel that there's a buzz about it, a small buzz, because it's a very small little podcast. But people do talk about it, and I get reviews and comments and people sending me emails. So that's enough to keep me going.
Is there anything that you still want to do with it? Are there new topics, new guests?
Well, if my goal is to really be one of the go-to podcasts for B2B SaaS marketers. Ideally, what the promised land looks like is that I start getting approached by some of these high-profile B2B SaaS companies, the VP of marketing, the head of marketing, the chief revenue officer, the CEOs, and they feel that this is a good place for them to appear. There's a good conversation to be had. And that's what I want. I would be great if agencies stopped pitching me and I started getting direct pitches from the VP of marketing for some of the big high-powered B2B SaaS companies. That would be amazing. There's small signs of success, but I think if I had to be driven, that's kind of the goal. And the other thing is I just want to be better focused on on my ICPs. I want to do content that appeals to the VP of marketing or the CEO of these companies so that they can see me as a thought leader and a smart marketer who can help them in some way.
Well, and to build on that, the VPs of marketing, I'll call it marketing leaders within SaaS organizations, you refer to yourself as a fractional CMO. So I'm curious, a two-part or two-pronged question. How do you define a fractional CMO, and how do you position it when you talk about ICP to the likes of a VP or a CMO or senior marketing leadership within a SaaS company?
Good question. So I define fractional CMO as essentially a part-time CMO. You're getting somebody who's experienced and has some expertise in a specific area or areas, but you're not paying them a full-time salary or perks or benefits or anything like that. So it's almost like you get to eat your cake and have it too, but you only get them part-time, whether it's a day a week or 2 days a week. And a lot of organizations that don't have a marketing leader, this is an ideal situation. There's no need to pay someone $150,000, $200,000 a year when they can get what they need and then have tactical resources to make it happen. And then fractional CMOs appeal to companies that usually don't have a marketing leader. They don't have a VP marketing. They may even not have a director of marketing, but mostly maybe they got some junior marketers or they're using agencies or contractors. And it's the entrepreneur who feels I need somebody to help me with marketing. I need a marketing leader. We don't have a budget for this, or we don't have a need for it, and so I'll bring in this resource, and hopefully they can basically run marketing for me, so I don't have to think about it. Because a lot of my target audiences, the CEO is running marketing, and he doesn't want to do it, or she doesn't want to do it. So that's the high level definition of a fractional CMO.
And they recognize they need additional bench strength. But do you further, I guess, expanding on the definition or what people should expect or go in with their eyes wide open? Is a fractional CMO involved in the execution? Are they more of a consigliere to the CEO and they're more consultative, but they don't have their hands in the execution? Where along that spectrum do they fall? Or I guess it could depend, but I'm just curious on your thoughts.
Well, that's one of the biggest challenges is that fractional CMO has increasingly become a very sexy title. So a lot of marketers who have been let go recently, for example, are reinventing themselves as fractional CMOs. But there's no hard and fast definition, at least right now. So as I said off the top, it's essentially a part-time CMO. Now, they can come in different shapes and sizes, and they can do different things. Some fractional CMOs, like a Mitch Solway, for example, are pure strategy. That's all they want to focus on. They don't want to do the tactical work. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They just want to work with teams and essentially say, this is what you need to do, and then do it. Some fractional CMOs, like myself, are strategic and tactical. The way that I differentiate myself is that, sure, I'll tell you what to do, but I'll also get my hands dirty to make sure that marketing happens. Some fractional CMOs will work a day a week, and some will work basically all the time, except they call themselves fractional because they don't want to be full-time employees. So one of the big challenges for companies looking for a fractional CMO is they need to figure out how much firepower they need, whether they need someone a lot to do strategy and tactics, or whether they just need someone to basically almost, as you say, be the consigliere, to be the right-hand person to the CEO. And that's a key part of defining scope when you get approached by someone looking for a fractional CMO.
If you were recommending, though, to an entrepreneur, do you recommend that there be a level of involvement, or even if it's strategic rather than execution, should a fractional CMO have some tie to outcomes for their impact, or?
Absolutely. That has to be, at the end of the day, you're hiring a very expensive resource, albeit less expensive than a full-time CMO. So regardless of whether you're fractional or full-time, at the end of the day, your performance is quantified by the outcomes that you help deliver. So one of the challenges with a fractional CMO is that when they come in, the first few months are going to be slow and steady because you're learning the business, you're learning the market, you're trying to get a better handle on the type of marketing. And we live in a world of instant gratification and overnight success, and so it can be frustrating for many CEOs when the fractional CMO is not producing results right away because they're a hired gun. You hire them to fill a gap, and if the gap isn't being filled immediately, then you've got a problem of misaligned expectations. So, but that I think it's one of the biggest challenges of being a fractional CMO. If you're not full time, and this is just my point of view, if you're not full time and you're ultimately responsible for outcomes, then it's a question of whether the two work together. Because
Right.
I've come to think that unless you're 24/7, unless you're drinking the Kool-Aid all the time, ultimately, like, you just can't be where you need to be and to make the results actually happen because you're not fully vested. You're part-time.
Well, and some of the factors of success are out of your control potentially.
Absolutely. So if you're not integrated into the business, if you're not talking to all the key stakeholders, if you're not in touch with everybody all the time and you're not pulling the levers on a continual basis, then there's things that pass you by. There's conversations that you're not having. There's emails that you're not getting because you're out of the loop because you're part-time. So it's a really hard balancing act, I think, for fractional CMOs and CEOs who are hiring them. And I think it probably works best for organizations that are just getting going and need a marketing leader to basically establish a rock solid foundation and then do some marketing, not a lot. But for bigger organizations with using a bigger marketing mix, I think it's a real challenge, a hard challenge.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins. Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
So then, is the recommendation to spend more time up front, having a frank conversation with the CEO, to be aligned on objectives, outcomes, expectations of day to day, but also, when you talk to someone who's an SEO expert, they talk about it's a minimum of 6 months for recalibrating SEO and having impact. Talk to content marketers. It's 6 months before whatever your content strategy that gets planned really starts to have momentum built. Are you having to have those kinds of, fractional CMO, whether it's a day a week or five half days or whatever? It's still, I'm not going to have an impact on day two. It's going to take a while because, as you said, you learn. But I'm just curious about that kind of upfront, frank conversation that has to be had.
It's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that you need to align expectations up front right away. You need to discover or uncover what the CEO is looking for, what the pains that the CEO is experiencing and why they came to you in the first place. I think one of the big challenges right now for fractional CMOs is that the focus is on tactics and lead gen. Companies are scrambling right now to maintain revenues in a soft market. Fractional CMO, they lean into strategy. And as you say, it takes time for their work to surface. All the positioning, the go-to-market plans, the systems that you put in place, and that takes time. And often you're not going to get results from a fractional CMO or see the ROI. It's a slow burn as opposed to things happening right away. And that's where the conversation from the get-go needs to happen. Is both sides need to understand this is a process, this is a journey, we're on this together, and if you lose faith, then it's not going to work. But that's juxtaposed with the fact that companies need leads, and they desperately need leads, and a lot of companies just aren't ready for a fractional CMO right now because they just can't afford the resources.
Well, and there's a phrase I keep hearing more so of late about having to go slow to go fast. That there has to be some patience. There has to be some, whether it might look to the outside eye like a plodding endeavor, but you're you're chipping away at all the things that need to be done, laying the foundation so that when you get the flywheel spinning, that it ideally spins rather smoothly, and you can handle all the volume of leads and onboarding, etc.
Yeah, I mean, to reflect the landscape right now, I've changed horses from a methodology point of view, and I've adopted a three-step process which involves diagnosing, fixing, and optimizing. Because I think that a lot of companies come to me because they've got a problem. No one ever comes to a Mark Evans because marketing is great, the company's doing great. They come to you because their website sucks, or they don't have enough sales and marketing collateral, or the competition is doing better marketing. And so what you need to do, at least that's my view right now, is you need to come in and you need to diagnose what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and then you need to fix the things that aren't working, uh, fill gaps of companies, the things that they're not doing that they should be doing, and then you need to create this machine that you optimize, pull the levers, move the dials all the time. And I think that's what CEOs want right now, is that they, as much as they need strategic guidance, they want someone who will come in, help them figure out what's going on, fix the machine, and then run it. And hopefully, in the process, you start to get momentum a little quicker than spending the time to think about it. So it's a bit of a balancing act right now. But as a consultant, as a fractional CMO, you really have to dance to the music. And right now, the music says dance fast. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, and I mean, I recognize and fully respect leads are a primary objective and a primary concern. But what are some of the other concerns or other things they're coming to you about? Maybe they can't articulate it very well, but they know they have a problem, but they may not be able to pinpoint it, but they know they need someone like you to come in, diagnose, and once identified, fix. What are some of the other things besides just leads that they're coming to you for?
I'm biased, but I think one of the biggest struggles that entrepreneurs have is that every market has fierce competition. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of companies competing. Like Scott Brinker came out with his Martech landscape report recently, and there are
Yes.
652 CRM companies out there and 11,000 Martech companies. So if you're one of those 652 CRM companies, how do you differentiate yourself? And I think
Good
a lot
luck.
of the unknown, kind of this thing that entrepreneurs can't get their head around, is why they don't capture the spotlight, why people don't understand how good their product is, how much value it delivers. And the problem is they have unclear, confusing, undistinguishable value brand positioning. They just don't have a story that resonates, a story that is different from everybody else. And and it's the big sort of 800-pound gorilla in the room. But they don't look at that. They look at the fact that their website bounce rates are high, or they're not enough conversions, or that their sales are slowing down. That's a symptom of a problem. And the bigger problem that they don't realize is that they don't have that compelling strategic narrative. They don't have positioning that says to the world, hey, we do this better or in a unique way than everybody else out there. And as a result, that makes us the obvious choice. It's a blind spot for CEOs and entrepreneurs. But to me, positioning underpins everything. If you've got a clear idea of what you do, who you serve, and the value it delivers, then it powers your marketing, your sales, your HR, your customer success, and your product development. But I don't think many CEOs and entrepreneurs see it, or if they do see it, it's a nice to have rather than a must have.
Well, what comes to mind is how do we get our prospect to swipe right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, you think about it. If you showed, like, I have a presentation where I show four different online accounting homepages, and three of the four, which represent most of the online accounting homepages, all say the same message, exactly the same message. So how do you tell them apart? And one of them has to do with, we power the success and dreams of entrepreneurs, which is a different type of messaging. Not to say it's the best positioning, but it's different. And in a world, teeming with competition, unless you are different in some way, then you kind of get lost in the crowd, and that's a very dangerous place to be. But it's a place where a lot of companies exist, and as a result, they spin their wheels from a marketing and sales perspective.
Well, and I don't bring this up to sideline the conversation, but the same mindset or frame of mind can be applied to people and personal brand on something like LinkedIn, whereas there's 1,000 directors of marketing, but if it's a director of marketing who helps with X, Y, and Z and these industries, suddenly, okay, I've said, using the phrasing that you just gave for the accounting software company, I said something that was provocative and it caught your attention. Even if that minuscule thing was enough to differentiate, gave you pause from scrolling or from going to another tab or whatever. That seems to be the key.
Well, I mean, when 2 years ago, when I decided to call myself a fractional CMO, I did it for a couple of reasons. One of them was that I tried calling myself a brand positioning expert, a digital marketing consultant, a brand storyteller, and none of them resonated because they just didn't stand out from the crowd. So I decided to call myself a fractional CMO, and it was a game changer in terms of brand awareness, in terms of people looking at that title and going, oh, I want to talk to that person because I want marketing leadership as opposed to a consultant. And I kept waiting for fractional CMO to gain momentum, and it's only in the last couple of months that it's actually happened. But as far as personal branding is concerned, I believe that there's riches in the niches. Is that it seems counterintuitive that it seems like you're backing yourself into a corner, but if you can say to people, if you have this problem, this specific problem, I'm one of the only options you consider because this is all I'm focused about. Like, because there's no doubt about what you do and the value that you deliver. So for personal branding, it's also being very clear about how you stand out from the crowd and to be known for something, right? As opposed to be known as a digital marketing consultant, which is really being known for nothing.
Well, and I think by your choice of fractional CMO, I have a much clearer idea of what I can expect you to help me with than a digital marketing consultant. That's a pretty broad landscape, and whether you're full time or not.
And a lot of them, both types of people do the exact same jobs. Theoretically, strategy and tactics. But which one would you hire? It's a marketer doing marketing.
Yeah.
So and perception is often reality. If people believe something about your brand, or how you position yourself, then that's who you are.
When jumping back to your reference to the Martech, and I've shared those slides before, and it just gets denser every year to the point of like it's illegible now with 11,000 entrants on a single page of a PDF or PowerPoint slide. As part of your role, are you helping? Even though you're focused on SaaS players, are you helping them navigate their own tech stack for selection and evaluation?
Sometimes, usually the biggest piece for a lot of companies is the CRM. Is that if they're going to do email marketing or ABM or even content marketing, then they need a CRM to underpin all they do. So they're using Salesforce or they're using HubSpot or they're using a less known brand. But
Right.
if they don't have a system in place, then you got to install that system and add on to it email marketing platforms like MailChimp or one of the other platforms out there. When I come into a client, they've got the fundamentals in place, the key pieces in place, but often they're missing sort of specific, sort of very focused parts of the technology stack. But if they don't have a CRM, then that's one of the first things you build. Is you have to go in there and establish the CRM because it really is the engine that powers everything.
Are there any SaaS companies that are doing a good job of positioning or standouts? No matter the category.
Obviously that's a $64,000 question because there's 11,000 MarTech companies that we could talk about. Well, one of the companies that I talk about when I do positioning presentations is a company called Chili Piper, which essentially allows salespeople to book meetings quickly with prospects. That's fundamentally what they do, and I've watched them over the last 2 years and watched how they've evolved their positioning and their messaging from being very inside baseball industry talk that was their messaging was indecipherable. I couldn't figure out what they were talking about. and to the point where they've simplified their messaging, where it's clean and it's clear, and it tells people right away what they do and why Chili Piper would matter to them. And that ultimately, in a fast-moving world, is successful positioning. Is that people, they don't have to think or mentally process how you could help them. It's just so obvious. They go, okay, I understand what you do, and then they can decide you're either going to be relevant to me or not, and that is the best place to be.
I can't have a conversation with a marketer without talking about AI and Chat GPT. When a CEO comes to you and, do you have to talk them out of, an idea, oh, like we can use AI to cover all the bases, or kind of do you help them dispel some myths to clear up some assumptions using your idea about positioning? Do you have to help them position where and how AI and ChatGPT can help, if at all, versus thinking that could be their salvation?
So ChatGPT is the biggest, most disruptive, powerful thing that I've seen since in the last 25 years of being a digital animal. There's nothing like it. E-commerce was huge, but not as big as this. Web 2.0 was massive, but not as big as this. And this really has changed the dynamic. And I think there's a lot of mysticism around ChatGPT as being this instant replacement for content marketing. And I think a lot of CEOs are just have no clue how to figure it out other than it's got huge potential. I did have one client come to me, we were talking about creating landing pages, and they casually said, "Oh, we'll just use ChatGPT to create all the content." And as a long-time content creator, I was like, "Oh my God, you can't do that. That's terrible." I will say that, right now, ChatGPT is a good tool for content creation if you're doing grunt work, low-level commodity type work like ad copy or email copy or things like that. Yeah. But it's not a tool that you'd use for long-form content. I mean, unless you're a unbelievable prompt jockey and you know how to use the tool to the nth degree, and there's not a lot of them out there, at least right now. But I will say that, we're at ChatGPT 4. What happens when there's 5, 6, and 7, and the machine becomes so good that you can't decipher the content that it produces and the content that a person creates? But I will say that the biggest thing that I worry about right now is not content creation, but content consumption. And in a world where there's so much content that can be produced quickly at scale, how do brands break out? How do you get a piece of content or your content portfolio and attract readership so that it can ultimately drive brand awareness, leads, and sales? Right now, a lot of companies, like a HubSpot, for example, can outflank the competition because their content is better than everybody else's, maybe even just a little bit better. But that advantage is going to disappear. And then what happens? What happens when the playing field is level and we've all got the same powerful tools to do whatever we want? I worry about that. I mean, the genie is out of the bottle right now, and it just feels like it's going to be really hard to get it back in. I was listening to the Pivot podcast earlier today, and they were talking about how Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which developed ChatGPT, is on a world tour, talking to users around the world and government, different levels of government. And essentially, I think what he's trying to do is set the stage for some kind of quasi-regulation, because ChatGPT unregulated, as you gave us one example, could just be the most dangerous thing out there. It's going to be wonderful in many ways, but it's also going to be dangerous. And the other thing that I wonder about, going forward is how people will continue to use search engines. Because I would say right now that my use of Google, for example, has probably dropped in half, easily dropped in half, because I don't have to use Google. I just use ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT, its answers are not always reliable, but for most of the things I'm looking for, I don't need factual information. I'm not like turning around and using it somewhere else. But I think for SEO, for search engines, that's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out, and how SEO overall changes too.
Well, and I'll send it to you later. It was a video from an AI specialist who exported analytics from Google Analytics and pasted the text in to ChatGPT and used the prompt saying, I'm about to provide you some data from Google Analytics. And he has these questions to basically prepare it, paste it in, and then starts to ask a series of questions, basically asking ChatGPT to crunch the data that it uploaded, that this user uploaded, and to start finding, now that you've analyzed, what can we do to increase conversions? And start having a conversation with ChatGPT stemming from the analytics, where, a lot of times you're left to your own devices to figure it out for yourself. And now some insights can, through just prompts, can be brought to the surface. But still, it's the marriage of the two. It's SEO and search with insight from ChatGPT. I don't purport to be an SEO specialist or expert, but I kind of go, that can help me do some heavy lifting before I have to involve some others.
That's one thing that I've thought about, is that I feel like if I don't catch up, if I don't gain some expertise into how to use ChatGPT other than the rudimentary ways that I'm using it right now, rewrite this phrase, give me 10 ideas for this. I mean, those are basic prompts. I have to become a ChatGPT jockey. I have to train myself, take courses to learn that I have the skills. Like, for example, I've spent 10 years working in the back end of WordPress. I'm not a WordPress expert. I'm not a coder by any means, but I know my way around WordPress. I know how to do all kinds of things. I need to get that same level of expertise when it comes to ChatGPT. Otherwise, I'm going to be walking around, basically unarmed within this content marketing world, and that's not a good place to be. Like, you need a level of expertise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like you. I use it a fair bit, and it's changed what I search for versus what I don't have to search for anymore. But I'm giving a presentation about AI and content marketing at the end of the month, and I'm using it as basically a catalyst to cram for an exam. I have a high level sort of positioning in my head and so on, but I want to give some real world examples for other people in our shoes, who are now saying to themselves, I have to get ahead of this train. And I think we talked about it in our pre-call, but this idea of people, AI is not going to take my job or the job of a marketer, but people who know how to use AI and ChatGPT will be all the more competitive as a result. So,
yeah, I mean, I just think it's just going to be a skill that you need to have. I mean, you won't be able to operate without it. And that, as you say, good writers are going to be expert ChatGPT users, because a good writer will be able to use ChatGPT and then leverage the machine to help them write better content faster. But I as an optimist, as a long-time content creator, I'd like to believe that there's still a role for writers. I think right now, the biggest value for a lot of people is editors and copy editors who can take ChatGPT content and polish it and make it look better, make it more readable, make it look less robot-like and more human-like. So I think maybe the lowly editor will regain some stature again, and have a role to play in this ChatGPT world.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, in that this can help us to be more productive, more efficient. As someone recently in a conversation with me referred to it, it's our second brain. But we still have to be involved with the editorial eye, or we still had to write the underlying IP on which the machinations and summaries and examinations occur. The human is still very much involved, and hopefully and foreseeably always will be.
Yeah, it's a cheat sheet. I mean, think about it that way, right? It just makes work faster, easier. It provides you with guidance and structure and ideas. And then right now, a human has to make those ideas and those bullet points and that copy come to life. It has to make it readable, engaging, entertaining, all the things that make good content stand out from the pack. And I think one of the things that maybe we'll see is that as companies pump out all this generic content, it'll be increasingly obvious that this content from this company is ChatGPT generated, and it's basically doesn't offer the value. And this company stands out from the crowd because their content is still powered by humans. It's authentic, it's trustworthy, it's real, it's got all the elements of creativity and the things that humans do best. And maybe that'll be something that that brand can rally around. And maybe some brands will come out and say, all our content is created by humans. Maybe, we get our ideas from ChatGPT, but everything is handcrafted by humans for humans. And that'll be part of their positioning as far as one way that they can stand out from the crowd. I mean, anything's possible, but it's one way to be unique in the marketplace.
Well, to your point, it's no one ever got fired for buying Microsoft. If we source the BBC or the New York Times, we have a reasonable expectation of quality and trustworthiness of the source. And even if the likes of some of those media outlets, even like BuzzFeed, if they're going to incorporate ChatGPT, we still have this sense that there's one or more humans there with oversight. And so maybe it minimizes or mitigates some of the risks.
Yeah, it's early days. It's so early. We're only 7 months into the ChatGPT world, and think about the change and the disruption that's happened since then. But I look at it and go, it's 7 months in. What does 17 months look like? What does 27 months look like? And the landscape will be completely different. And I think there'll be some wonderful things created by AI. I mean, you're already seeing these amazing tools that have democratized a lot of the things that we do as digital marketers. But at the same time, I think there's some big battles to be fought from a regulatory and policy point of view, and copyright for that matter.
Well, yeah, and you saw the Kamala Harris, and there was a roundtable discussion or a boardroom meeting at the White House with a variety of players, and both a warning and trying to get their arms around. We need to, as Altman was doing around the world, is there has to be some sort of regulatory mechanism, because some people might react more prohibitively by saying, if we can't regulate it, then we just won't allow it, because otherwise it could get away from us.
Yeah, there's lots of places we could go here. I mean, we could have an entire conversation about ChatGPT.
Yes, another full episode. Well, and to your point, I'm celebrating my 15th anniversary on Twitter on Monday. There's no cake or anything, but I sit there and think of what's happened on Twitter in 15 years, and to your point, when you look at what's happened on ChatGPT in 7 months, mind blowing. So
it is mind blowing, and I think one of the biggest challenges for marketers these days is that the landscape is always shifting, always evolving. Just when you feel like you've got a handle on things and that you're the master of your domain or the mistress of your domain, then the world shifts on you. And I think what's happened is that ChatGPT and AI have, the floors has fallen out of a lot of people. We're in a free fall now, and we're all trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we do it? Who's going to be relevant? Who's going to be, expendable? How do I improve my skills? How do I stay, how do I make money? How do I deliver? How do I get paid for the services that I deliver rather than being replaced by a robot? So, man, it's crazy right now. I feel like it's so volatile right now, but you just have to keep going, right? You just have to, think at some point in time you'll figure it out, and you'll figure out how you can evolve in this new AI world.
Well, I mean, you've been in the digital space for quite some time. You've ebbed and flowed and evolved as the landscape has shifted. So I think you'll not that you need my words of encouragement. I think you'll do just fine navigating this next chapter. So
fingers crossed. We'll see.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for your time. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to sharing the episode and some valuable clips and insights with the audience.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. Thanks for the opportunity. Always good to talk marketing and the wild west of AI and ChatGPT.
Thanks again.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.